Hey everybody, Shawn Powers here. This is a Linux Plus preparation video, but it's a little bit of a strange one because Linux Plus is designed to be distribution agnostic, right? So it works whether you're a Red Hat person or Ubuntu or Debian or SUSE, whatever your distribution is, it tries to just teach you the general things. But when it comes to managing network interfaces, it's really different on the different distributions. And so we're going to cover a couple different ways. And it's a little bit strange that they mention something specifically in the Linux Plus objectives and don't mention some other seemingly important things at all. Let me show what I'm talking about. So this is the section that we're going to look at. I'm calling it 1.5.1. It's part of the 1.5 objective from CompTIA for Linux Plus. But there's specifically two different styles of network tools. There's the newer IP Route 2 tools, which are default in Ubuntu and Debian. And then there's net tools, which I don't think is the default anywhere anymore, but it is installed still in like Red Hat 8, or we're going to use Rocky Linux, the free version of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And so net tools is like kind of the old school way of doing things. And these tools are kind of like all of them are wrapped into one with IP. And then SS is a tool that takes the place of something they didn't even mention, which I think is weird, and that is netstat, which is part of the NetTools program. So we're going to look at that. And then they mention this particular folder, which is very specific to Red Hat. So why they mention this, but then don't mention etc. NetPlan, which is what like Ubuntu uses, I don't know. So I'm going to show you a bunch of things. Some of them aren't listed here, but the other thing we need to know is that Network Manager is generally how network interfaces are managed in a GUI situation. Now, both of the servers we're going to look at are both running a GUI, so Network Manager is installed. And here, let me clear that off. NM, or Network Manager CLI, is the way that we can interact with that on the command line. I've never done anything more than look at stuff with NMCLI though. So I want to show you how it is and you can play with it more. But anyway, we're going to cover all this stuff and it's going to be a little bit strange because like I said, it's different generations of tools. And also this is something that distributions vary in widely. So first things first, I want to show you some of the tools that they mentioned, like IP and ifconfig and hostname and ARP and all those things. If we're on Rocky Linux or Red Hat, both, at least version 8, both are installed by default. So we can do something like say, well, if we just run IP, it's going to give us the various things that we can run. The thing about the IP command in the IP Route 2 tools, which are now the default in most distributions, are that this takes the place of multiple standalone tools in the old NetTools package or suite of utilities. And so if we want to look at the current IP addresses on a system, we'll do IP address, and it will show us that. Now, one nice thing about IP is that you can shorten it like a lot. You can just say IP space A, and it'll do the exact same thing. As long as there's not like a conflict, like A could mean multiple different things, it's just going to do that. And what we can see here when we do that is this is, well, hang on, let me clear the screen so it's a little bit clearer. Clear the screen so it's clearer. We'll do IPA, and then it shows us that there are actually 3 network interfaces on this computer, which is a little confusing, but the first one is the local host interface. It's just a local loopback interface 127.0.0.1. I think we've covered this in like Linux Essentials. Basically, this is the computer's way on the network to say me, right? Every computer has a local host interface that has the address of 127.0.0.1. That means local. It means me, basically, in network speak. Number 2 here, the second interface is ENP1S0. Now, this is going to be different depending on what hardware you have installed on your computer, but this is the actual Ethernet interface on this computer. And we can see a bunch of stuff, like it has an IP address of 10.0.2.15, 24-bit network mask, the broadcast address. This is our live address on our system. And then this one down here, this is installed by the Virt program, like virtlib or whatever for virtualization. This has virtualization software pre-installed by default in Rocky Linux 8. And so this is the interface that allows the virtualization system to create other virtual interfaces. So this is not like our live connect to the internet Ethernet card. That's what ENP1S0 is. Rocky Linux 8 specifically comes with both the old way and the new way of doing things, both using the NetTools suite of commands, and the IP tool comes by default. And so I'm going to show you how to do a bunch of things, and it's going to look very similar. Just know that that's because I guess we're in a transitional period. I don't know of any distributions other than maybe Red Hat 8 that still use the NetTools package by default, but I'm going to show you both ways. And if it seems like I'm like, why are we doing this twice? Because they specifically listed. You need to know, in case you're on an older system that uses NetTools, how to do it there if the tool like IP isn't installed. And so IPA shows us the address, but we could do like IP route, and it's going to show us the routing table on this computer. And this one's pretty simple. Our default route is via this gateway. Remember, if you look up here, this is our actual IP address on the computer. So the default is via this gateway address, via this device, and you can see that it's we got an address via DHCP, and this is the address of it. So this gives us the information about the default route on the system. This is saying that if we want to actually reach a computer on the 10.0.2.0 subnet, we actually just reach out directly because that's a subnet that we're on. So this is the routing table. And then let's see, what else could we look at? We can look at our ARP neighbors. Now, ARP stands for Address Resolution Protocol. It kind of goes backwards. Instead of mapping an IP address to a MAC address, like the hardware address on a card, which is like right here. This is the MAC address on our network card. ARP kind of goes backwards. It's like, okay, what MAC address do I have, and do I know like an IP address for that? And basically, using the IP tool, we can say IP neighbors. Oh, and this gives us a good reason why sometimes I just like to do things short, because it's not neighbors plural, it's neighbor. So IP neighbor, and then it will give us all of the local computers that it happens to know about, which are very few because this is a virtual machine on a virtual subnet. So that is the way to get things like the ARP neighbors on our computer. Now, if we want to do all that stuff using the old NetTools package, each one has its own unique thing. So we would say if config for interface config, and that's going to show us the same sort of information that IP space A or address would give us using the IP tool itself. So if config will show us that. We can do ARP, and it's going to show us the same information that IP neighbor showed us, just in a slightly different format. It's just a different tool, but that's the ARP tool that comes with NetTools. We could do route is its own command. And if we do route and press enter, that same information, again, just shown in a slightly different way. Our default gateway, meaning anything that we want to go to, is going to use this interface. Anything on this local network, we're just going to use, we're going to contact locally. And so again, it's the same information, just presented in a slightly different way. There are a couple other tools that are mentioned. For example, hostname. So if we say host name, it'll show us our host name, which in this case is rocky8.home. We could do hostname -d, and it will just show us the domain, or hostname -h, and it'll, and I guess it's not H. What is it? -S. So hostname -s for just the first part of that without the entire domain. And then -f apparently is the default here in Rocky Linux, but otherwise you would say hostname -f for the fully qualified domain name, which is what it showed us by default. So rocky8.home. And that is how we can see what it is, but you can also set the host name if you have root privilege. So we could say sudo hostname billy.bob. And now if we do host name, we're going to see our host name is now billy.bob, but that's only going to be temporary. When we reboot the computer, it's going to go back to the setting inside, etc. hostname, which is rocky8.home in this Red Hat system. Okay, so that's just a temporary change. And speaking of temporary changes, also, if we want to manipulate the network manager, we can use nmcli, and it will give us a list of all the stuff. Now, you're probably thinking, is this just like a third way of doing like IPA or if config? And not really, because what this is doing is it's controlling, if I'm going to move the mouse up over here, This is our wired connection. If we hit the control or the configuration thing here, this is how we configure Network Manager using a GUI. Okay, so this is our GUI configuration for Network Manager here. Like we click this little gear, it's going to show us all of this stuff. I'm going to close that, but we can do the same thing using nmcli. For example, we could do nmcli. Let's do help because it shows us a bunch of stuff we can do. And this is the same thing too, where we can just use like one letter. So it's kind of nice, like down here. We can do like nmcli-g, so nmcli-g, and it's going to show us our the information about our connections, our general status here. We're connected, full connectivity. We don't have Wi-Fi, even though it's enabled, we don't have a Wi-Fi card on our system. And so this is information we can do. Let's see, nmcli N to see whether networking is enabled or not. So we could turn that off. So nmcli networking off. And now if we do, and again, we're going to see it's disabled. And so look what happened over here. I don't know if you saw it was happening, but it's off over here. So the nmcli does the exact same thing as using the GUI. It's just using the command line tool. So if we do this and go back to on, watch when I hit enter, watch up there, it should go to on. Boom. So it switched it to on using the command line tools. Now there's other things too. We could look at an nmcli connection, and this is our connection with the UUID. But the thing that's important to note here is that whether we change it with the command line tool nmcli or the GUI tool up here on Red Hat, what actually changes is, remember it showed us a specific network folder to look at, the etc sysconfig network scripts, which is, I'm going to do pwd, that's where we are, etc sysconfig network scripts right here in a Red Hat or Rocky 8 system. If we look, there is a file, ifcfg, and that was another thing that was specifically spelled out in the objectives. What is ifcfg? And in Red Hat, this is where configurations are stored for individual interfaces. And in this case, so if we look at it, I'm just going to cat out the contents of it. We can see these are a whole bunch of settings. For example, does it start on boot? Now we can edit this file using like VI or Nano, and that's the same as if we were to use either nmcli or the GUI tool over here. But this is where the setting is actually stored. So if we were to come over here and click on the gear and then say, don't connect automatically, and then click apply, where that is saved is in this file. So I just catted it out before that, and it says on boot equals yes. If we look at this file again, now it says on boot equals no, because we told it not to connect automatically on boot. And so this is where the information is stored, except it's kind of not, because with Red Hat or Rocky Linux, again, Rocky Linux is just a free version of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. It's like a byte for byte copy. It's what CentOS used to be. Anyway, with version 9, that folder that is specifically spelled out as an objective for the Linux Plus test is not used in Red Hat version 9. Let me show you. Because while it looks similar, this is actually Rocky Linux 9 based on Red Hat Enterprise Linux 9. And if we look in this folder, the same folder, etc. sysconfig network scripts, it just says, ooh, that's strange. There's not an ifconfig file. There's a README file. And if we look at it, it just says basically, previously, Network Manager used to store stuff in here, but it doesn't anymore. Now, it's stored in a key file format, an INI file. It is not stored using ifconfig anymore. If you want to actually control it, like there's ways that you can migrate stuff back to the old format or whatever. But basically, all the stuff that we have to learn about this folder and ifconfig files and how they're managed doesn't apply to Red Hat 9. So you need to be prepared for that. Like if you are, if you're taking the exam, you're going to be presented with the objectives that they gave you. But if you're in the real world and you're at a Red Hat system that is version 9, things have changed. And so that's not where you're going to find stuff. But there are instructions in here because, again, it was a recent change. And I know Ubuntu does not even have an etc sysconfig network scripts folder at all. It doesn't use that whatsoever, Ubuntu uses something called NetPlan. So I'm going to show you how things work in Ubuntu and then show you both SS and NetStat, the one that I mentioned in our first slide. So just for a change of pace, our terminal window is white here, but this is Ubuntu 22.04, and in Ubuntu, it still uses a network manager to manage the things in a GUI system. So like right up here, these are here, if we go to edit connections, this is just a different way to manage all of those same settings that we were looking at in Red Hat or in Rocky Linux. So there's just a different interface to manage network manager. But when it comes down to it, if it's a headless system, like there's no GUI at all, it's just going to use NetPlan. So the folder in Ubuntu, this is just kind of bonus material because it's not mentioned in the Linux Plus objectives right now. If we go into etc. NetPlan on an Ubuntu system, there's going to be at least one file in here. It's a YAML file. And if we look at it, it's pretty simplistic here because the configuration is not use, like this is not where IP information and stuff is configured in a GUI system. Basically, all it does is it says, okay, use network manager, which is that GUI tool up there. And I believe we have NMCLI. Yeah, we do. Okay, so we can control it either using the command line tools or the GUI tools up here. So it's scriptable, but basically, that's how it manages it. But I wanted to mention the NetPlan folder because if you don't have a GUI installed on Ubuntu, you just have Ubuntu server, you're not going to have like a sysconfig network scripts folder. You're just going to have the etc. NetPlan folder, and that's where your IP information is going to be stored. Now, the other thing that I wanted to show you is there's a tool called SS, and if you do that, it's just going to show you all the different connections on your system. And this takes the place of NetStat. Now, yeah, this is what I wanted to show you. NetStat, all those tools, the net tools, does not come by default on most Linux distributions, but you usually can install it like I'm going to here. So once they're installed, just like SS returned that, again, that's going to be the default, we can do NetStat, and it's going to do something similar, slightly different format. But the nice thing about NetStat and SS is they both accept my favorite flag that I always use. I've used it for decades with NetStat, and now I use it with SS because it continues to work, and it's really hard to forget. And that is, we'll start with, well, first let's clear the screen. We'll do NetStat, the old one. So this is part of the NetTools suite, along with like Route and ARP and all those tools that we looked at before. But NetStat dash tuna. NetStat dash tuna. Tuna, tuna, tuna. You won't forget tuna. And the flags here just basically give you information that's really useful. I mean, we can look at the help screen. You can do that on your own to see the different commands, but this is a really useful one because it will show you when different ports on the system are listening. So generally I'll do something like netstat-tuna and pipe that through grep for the word listen, all in caps. And it'll show you all of the listen ports. Like if you have Apache installed, it's going to be listening on port 80, and it will show you what address it's listening on and what port it is listening on. Like for example, this 631, I believe, is CUPS, the print server. It's listening with TCP version 6, so IP version 6. That's why this looks like this. This is the localhost version, or port 631. It's listening. So there is a CUPS daemon running, which means that, we can print from this computer. Now the same thing works with SS, SS-tuna, which sounds like a boat from Gilligan's Island. But anyway, the SS-tuna, and then we'll grep for listen. It shows us the same stuff, again, slightly different format because it's a new suite of tools, but the same sort of thing, right? It shows us that it's listening on port 631, both in IP version 4 and IP version 6. Again, that's our CUP server. If we had other servers, we would see those ports specified here. This is a port 53 is DNS, so it has DNS installed. It's listening for DNS requests on the local host as well. So that's SS and NetStat. They do the same thing. You're probably going to have SS installed and not NetStat, but just know that it's there. So all of these tools are for manipulating your current running network connection, right? So whether you're using IPA or you're using ifconfig in the NetTools suite, you can see what the configuration is. You can temporarily change those configurations. Like we can assign another address using the IP tool like IPA and then assign an address. The thing is, those do not carry over. Like when we change the host name, it will only change it for that session. When the computer reboots, it's going to read from configuration files. And that's what you need to understand, is that in order to change like network settings, you're going to either have to edit that file, use the GUI tool in Network Manager, or use NMCLI. Those changes will stick because it actually changes the configuration file. But like the IP command where you change the routes, or the route command, those are not going to make permanent changes on your system. That's just like in the moment, it's going to make those changes. Hopefully that makes sense. But those are the tools, whether it's the old style or the new style or some combination if you're on Red Hat version 8. All of those different ways are how we can manage network connections on our system. Learn everything. Do what you love, and most importantly, be kind. I know this was a lot. I encourage you to install multiple virtual machines so that you can play with the different things, like install Ubuntu, install Rocky version 8, and install Rocky version 9 if you can, just to play around with all those various ways of manipulating network interfaces on your system. See you in the next video.